This is the Always Direct podcast, and we talk with movers and shakers of this world to learn about the ups and downs they went through to get where they are now. Let's get started with the show.
My name is John Rayon, and I am the host of the Always Direct podcast. I have a special guest today. For anybody who does anything in the pizza business, the bakery world, or anything to do with dough at all, I have the famous Tom Lehman, aka the Dough Doctor. How are you, Tom?
I am just great this morning, John.
Tom, you've been writing articles, and we have been writing articles and diagnosing dough problems since 1967, if I'm not mistaken. Is that true?
That's correct.
So what are you doing these days, right now, 2020?
7 years ago, I retired from the American Institute of Baking, where I put in almost 50 years. And since my retirement, I've been a consultant, a fisherman, a deer hunter, a woodworker, and a carpenter, all rolled into one. My main love is consulting for the food industry. That's what I've done most of my life, and I continue to do it into my retirement.
Who are the type of clients that call you?
All types. I mean, I work with small mom and pops to small regional chains. I work with a large wholesale frozen manufacturers. Right now, I'm presently working with two of the big box chains.
And what are the what's the name? Well, first of all, what's the name of your company and the website, just for the audience?
Just Dough Doctor Consulting, Dough Doctor Consulting, and my website is doughdoctor.com.
Excellent. Okay, great. So these people, these companies, these regional locations, these large box companies, these small mom and pops, why are they calling you most of the time?
They're having some type of problem with either with their dough or their pizza. Sometimes it's a growth issue. Lately, I've been working with a couple of smaller companies. When I say companies, they'll own maybe 2 or 3 regional stores in the same city or town. And what's happened is that due to C-19, they've had to change gears. And historically, maybe they've been dine-in. One of them I'm working with right now, they have historically always been a dine-in. They do a little bit of Delco. It's an acronym for delivery carryout. And now dine-in is so limited. For a while, it wasn't even permitted. And so now it's on a very limited basis. They've had to change gears and go more to delivery. And what they have found is that their existing ovens really aren't maybe the best suited for the Delco trade. And so now they're changing ovens and going over with air impingement ovens, which is a much better suited oven for Delco. And the reason why is because of the airflow in the oven. It dries out the pizza much better. And so now they've got a new oven, and they don't know how to use it, or they don't know how to use it to the best of their advantage. So that's where I get called in because of the fact that I've been roughly 50 plus years in the pizza industry. I've seen all of these things come aboard. For example, when air impingement ovens first came on the scene, a good friend of mine worked for the company that actually developed the air impingement ovens.
Is that Middleby? Is that Middleby?
He had me come out. No, this is way before Middleby. Middleby just they were just allowed to use the patent, and I got involved with it from the technical side, from the engineering side. So I learned how air impingement worked from the engineering aspect, not just from the use aspect. And once you understand the engineering side of it, the use part of it becomes second nature. It's very easy. So that happened to be the direction that everybody went. So that really gave me a leg up over the saddle, you might say, in knowing how to work with air impingement ovens. And in fact, I've been involved with all of the air impingement oven companies, and either as a technical service person, you might say, not on staff or anything, but a person that their field people would call. I've got this problem with an air impingement oven, and I can't produce this type of pizza. Tom, what do I need to do? And that's essentially the verbiage in that call. And I will work with them at finding resolution to the issue. What type of finger configuration is needed? What type of bake time, what bake temperature is needed, even to the point of identifying the correct baking platform, because these ovens use an open link conveyor going through them. We have to use what we call a baking platform, and that would be a screen, a pan, a disc. You have to put the pizza on something or it'll fall through the conveyor.
Yeah, definitely. So that brings me on to the next question, which is, so Tom, I don't know. I don't think you know this. I actually am in the pizza business myself. I have opened over 9 pizzerias in my life, 9 restaurants, mostly pizzerias. And then I started a direct. So my brother mainly handles a lot of the pizza division. We franchised and we have restaurants in the Chicagoland area and Indianapolis area. But then now I focus all my time on the podcast, and I have a direct mail marketing company and so we do some digital, but mainly direct mail for restaurants across the nation. And the only reason why I tell you this is because I have some questions for you. The reason why I was excited to have you on today is because I have lots of friends in the pizza business, lots of customers that I talk with all the time about, they ask me if I know anything about troubleshooting this and troubleshooting that with regards to oven and anything to do with the pizza business. And, there is something that I need you to answer for me. My dream has always been to go to conveyor belt ovens because it's easier, it's consistent. But I went and I tried to use Middleby Marshall. I live not too far from the Middleby Marshall manufacturing over here. And I went to the best ovens that they have that all the big chains use. And I couldn't figure out how to get my crust to not get, it comes out looking excellent. Okay. It comes out of the pizza. It comes out of the oven looking really perfect, evenly cooked. Cheese looks great. Crust looks crispy. You put it in the box for 5 minutes. You take it out. It's a soggy mess. So I just couldn't figure out, and maybe it was just my particular type of dough. I couldn't figure out how to get it so it wasn't soggy. And I felt like a deck oven. Okay. I felt like a deck oven did a way better job with regards to that.
First question I would ask you is, what was your bake time?
Well, I was playing around with it, so I was in their kitchen. So I did it from like 7 minutes. I did it from 6 minutes to all the way up to 13 minutes.
One of the things you have to remember is that air impingement ovens, they're extremely efficient. And in fact, they're second only really when it comes to making a pizza to frying. In fact, you can essentially make a fried crust in an air impingement oven and just put a little bit of oil in a pan and you'll make a fried crust. One of the things that you can do with it, and it all has to do with finger profiling.
Yeah.
And you've got fingers on the top and fingers on the bottom. And what happens is that when you hit it with too much air too fast, you dry out the top surface of the crust. I want to put myself in the head of the class, and I'm going to make you my students. And I taught pizza seminars for almost 40 years at AIB that I wrote and developed, and we implemented. It was the most successful program we ever did. And what makes a better insulator?
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure I heard you speak at one of the pizza conventions in Vegas once or twice. I'm not sure if that's true or not.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
You're
famous.
I've done just about every single Pizza Expo. I'll tell you a funny story about that after a while, maybe.
Okay.
But what makes a better insulator? Something that's dry or something that's wet? And we all know the answer to that. Something that's dry. Uh, I always told my students, would you even think about putting your hand into a 500-degree oven? And the answer, there's a lot of people look at me, they raise their eyebrows, they say, good grief, no. I say, well, I do it all the time. And in fact, you've probably done it too if you've got a deck oven.
All the time.
And so you put your hand in there all the time. It doesn't get burned. You don't touch anything when you're in there, but you put your hand in. Now, let's back up a minute. Let's put steam in that oven. Would you put your hand in there now? And
No.
the answer would be no. Why? Because you're going to get burned. So things that are wet conduct heat much better. Here's what happens. You hit that crust too fast with a lot of heat, and you dry it out. And you develop this dry layer on the outside of the crust. You cannot conduct heat to the inside of it. If you can't conduct heat to the inside of it, you can't pull the moisture out of it. Now you end up with a high moisture finished crust. And guess what it does after you stick it in the box? Yep, wet and soggy. There you go. And I'm going to guess because you're at their facility working with their people, they were bending over backwards to show you how fast they could bake a pizza and how well they could bake a pizza. And fast and well is not always the answer to the best. And for the application, might be fine for dine-in, but for a box, you really want to change your top and bottom profile. You might want to hit it maybe with an emitter, an IR panel, which blocks off all airflow initially, and it's just a black panel that fits in there, so you're not blowing any air in the first phase of the oven. And so it's just like an infrared oven, a more gentle heat. And so you're allowing some heat penetration, especially for a thin crust, because infrared rays will penetrate about a quarter of an inch into the product. And so you can thoroughly bake it from the inside out, and you can dry it out much better. And then you hit it with air, maybe halfway through. That dries up your toppings, gets that surplus moisture off of it. Remember, everything you put on top of your pizza is between 85 and 90% water. And that moisture is being released during the baking process. So you got to get it off of the pizza. And then at the very end of the oven, towards the exit in that very last finger configuration, top and bottom, I use that one to control my crust color. If I want more color on the cheese, I might blow more air on the top. If I want more color on the bottom, I make sure that one's fully open. If I've got my good color already, let's say I've got a crust that's got high sugar in it, and it's already got good color in it, and now it's getting too dark. Most people would just maybe speed up the oven. I don't want to speed up the oven because I really want to get these well baked. So what I will do is I'll go back and I'll reprofile that bottom so I'm not putting as much air on the bottom of the pizza, which slows down the bake to the bottom, controls my crust color, still allows me to get full bake with full bake time. It's that simple. It's just knowing the physics of the ovens.
Yeah, Tom, let me tell you something. When I went to Middleby Marshall, these guys didn't even try to explain how to do that. Anything of what you just said. These guys were just letting me play around with the oven. And, I played around with the fingers as well, but it seems like they didn't even know what they're talking about. I knew more about it than they did. But just so for our audience, the fingers that we're talking about are these long. So the heat gets poured in on both sides of the oven, on top and on bottom, and you can remove these long heat valves so that you can control where the pizza gets heated up. Is that correct? Is that a good way of describing it?
Yeah, probably the best way to describe it, John. I think everybody understands how a flat screen TV works. Works on pixels, and you're not looking at a solid color. You're looking at a lot of little dots on your screen that all kind of come together. When an air impingement oven bakes something, it's not baking it in a solid color. It's actually baking it in overlapping stripes. That's how it actually bakes.
Gotcha.
So each one of those stripes is from one of the fingers. And so you can control that, and there's two ways to do it. You can control the air velocity through the oven. They have different blade pitches for their fans. And then you can also adjust the fingers themselves, and there's two parts to the finger. There's the outer sleeve, and then it's what they call the inner sleeve. And the inner sleeve, it actually looks like a piece of screen, heavy duty screening. And that may have small holes in it, may have large holes. When you look at the outer sleeve, it's got finger diameter holes in it. And people think, well, that's what the air blows through. It is, but up on the other side of that panel, within that, there is a screen too. And sometimes the larger holes match with those, sometimes they don't. And when they don't, they're there for a reason. They disrupt that airflow, so you get a different airflow pattern through the oven.
Gotcha.
Which brings me to another point. These ovens, air impingement ovens, they've been improving over the years. They're quieter, they're more efficient. They actually bake a lot better. But something that I saw happen, and I've been called in a number of times to address this issue. With some of the brand new ones, they actually don't bake as well as as the previous generation oven. And one of the things that we found, I can't validate this because they're being kind of tight-lipped about it, but I think what they've done is they've increased the airflow to the point in these ovens where we are getting this drying effect, and we can't control it anymore by changing the fingers unless we totally block them off. Because I've been finding that in more and more cases, I've actually had to go in to the ovens and really shut down airflow. Well, I've never had to do that with the older ones. So, I mean, there's only so many things you can do with the physics involved with an air impingement oven. And one of them is moving more air. An air impingement oven is a hair dryer. That's the best way to describe it. It is a hair dryer. And that's how it works, just like a hair dryer. And how many settings do you have on a hair dryer?
3.
You got off, you got low, and you got high. And what's happened is they've gone from low, which they've had on all the earlier generation ovens. Now they've increased it, so now they got high. And when you use the high setting, you can burn your scalp with that in some cases. But you're blowing that much air through it, and you're extracting heat from the air, putting it onto the product. And when you're doing this, all of a sudden now you can burn a product very easily, or you can overly dry it out on the surface, so now you can't bake it properly.
Yeah, you know what you're saying makes a lot of sense. So you're getting it crispy on the outside too quickly that the moisture that's on the inside of the dough can't escape. So the only way it's going to escape is once you put it into the pizza box and you cut it.
Exactly.
Once you cut it in the pizza box, suddenly all this steam and water just pours out, and that's why you got a mess. Okay, I got you. That's a great point. Great to know. I did not know that. I could have used that knowledge a long time ago, but. All right, I'm going to ask you a couple of more questions about ovens, and then we'll move on to more pizza stuff. Would you prefer? Okay. Have you ever used Hot Rocks? It's called Hot Rocks, but it's an Italian company, I think. Hot Rocks Pizza Deck. It's a granite conveyor belt.
Oh, okay, like a Picard oven.
That's what Picard rechanged the name to Hot Rocks. Yes, Picard.
Okay.
They have
gotcha.
I think they have two divisions.
I know I'm Picard. Yeah.
Have you ever used the Picard oven because it looks so sexy?
Yeah, absolutely. Used it for a couple of years.
Tell me about it.
they they work reasonably well. I've never had any issues with them. Terribly expensive when you compare them to a standard air impingement oven. But what you got is a series of, you might say, individual uh, stone decks that are linked together on a conveyor, and you place your pizza right onto that. So you're baking more so right on the deck as opposed to on a conveyor. A lot of people refer to it as a traveling deck oven.
Yeah. So
And then you got airflow control on the top of it.
people say that deck ovens cook way better than the traditional chain conveyor belt ovens, and I have found that to be true. Would you disagree with that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes, I do disagree with it. It's just the fact that what do you think would be easier to drive, a manual shift car or an automatic shift car?
Well, I mean, obviously, automatic would be easier, but I'm talking about the taste.
Yeah, but here's the deal. It all depends. In automatic, anybody can drive an automatic. Would you agree with that? It's pretty easy to drive.
Oh yeah, of course.
But it takes a little bit of coordination to drive a stick shift.
A lot of coordination.
All right. But once you've mastered it, there's nothing to it. It's second nature. And the same thing holds true with ovens. Deck ovens, they're easy to master. You've only got one thing to control. And that one thing is baking temperature. You either make it hotter or you make it cooler. That's it. And the rest is strictly subjective. Every pizza is done to the oven tender's satisfaction. If they want more color on it, they leave it in a little longer. If it's developing color too fast, they take it out a little bit sooner. If the dough isn't quite right, you bake it accordingly. Everything depends upon your oven tender. In an air impingement oven, hey, just like they say in computers, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. Everything's got to be right going in, because if it isn't right coming in, it ain't going to get any better coming out. So you got variability in, variability out. That is the sad truth about it. Now, when it comes to flavor, most people, what they're actually picking up on is the toasting that you get on the bottom, the color development. And I'll give you a good example. Anybody out there can do this if you want to see it firsthand, real easy. English muffins. If you simply take an English muffin, and they've already been forked, and they have a machine that kind of sticks these long prongs into it all the way around, which allows you to tear it apart. And that's an important part of their flavor, believe it or not, because when you toast a forked muffin, you get all these little burn points, these little char points. And all of these little char points that you're getting on there, they contribute to the flavor of the muffin.
Yeah.
If you were to simply take that muffin and rather tear it apart, take an electric knife or a very, very sharp serrated knife and very carefully cut it in half. So now it's got a cut surface like a slice of bread, and toast it. It doesn't have the same flavor. So what does this have to do with pizza? When you bake pizza in a deck oven, if you look at the bottom of it, you find these little points on the bottom, these little blisters and stuff. Some people call it char. And so it's done a little bit more than in other areas. So you got light and dark, you got modeling on the bottom. That contributes to the flavor of that crust. And that's a very important aspect. Now, in an air impingement oven, it does too good of a job. It gives you a totally uniform color across the bottom.
It does.
And I can just describe the flavor that you get from that in one word. And that is boring.
Yeah.
And so if everything tastes the same, you don't taste differences. But when you've got variability, you can taste these differences, and that adds interest. We like to refer to that as layering of flavors, so you can taste different flavors. And so that's what we're picking up on. Now, it just so happens that I'm familiar with that issue. I knew what it was, and oh gosh, 12, 14 years ago, there was a lot of work done. The late Big Dave Ostrander, and Evelyn Sloman, they did a lot of work with Lincoln Ovens, Lincoln Food Service.
Yeah,
and they were actually trying to take an air impingement oven and impart the hearth bake characteristic to it. And so they spent quite a bit of time working on that. And the agreement, they wanted me on the team, and I said, no, let me be the judge, out of the way. I said, because I can bring a dimension that you guys can't. And I said, if I'm involved in it, I said, I think we're going to be biased. So they worked on it, and at our annual pizza seminar, which we held here in Manhattan, Kansas at AIB, we had Lincoln representatives there, and we had the Lincoln ovens there, and they made their best rendition of a hearth-baked pizza. And they asked me what I thought about it, and I said, okay, that's all I can say. I said, but you can still tell that it's not hearth-baked. And how could you tell? Real simple. Look on the bottom. The color was too uniform. You didn't have this modeling. You didn't have these blisters. You didn't have the bubbles that were charring on the bottom. And I said, let me think about this a little bit. So I got to thinking about it, and I had some pans in inventory. We had literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different pans from all the pan manufacturers that we worked with for our pizza seminars. And I pulled out one of the pans, and I said, let me try something here. And I went back to our engineering shop, and I started drilling some holes in one of the pans, and came out and I said, let's try baking a pizza on this once. And we baked a pizza on it, and voila, all of a sudden you could look at the bottom of it, and everybody agreed. Evelyn, Dave, I looked at it and I said, surprised me, it worked. I put larger holes in the bottom of the pan, almost 3/4 inch diameter holes in the bottom of this pan. Nobody ever used a hole that big before. And I really cranked up the temperature of the oven, and I took it right up. I took it up to about 520 degrees, 515. 515, I think, is where we maxed out at. And we ended up with a finished pizza that when you looked at the bottom, you'd have sworn it was baked in a deck oven, because where those holes were at, it got more heat, because there was nothing. You have to heat the pan before you can heat the crust, and didn't have the pan to interfere with that, so it got a little bit more heat. And being at high temperature, even a few seconds more heat made a big difference. Like I always tell my students, if you don't think a few seconds makes a big difference in an air impingement oven, stick your hand into it for a count of 3, and you'll see what I mean. And so it's not something that anybody's ever taken me up on. You don't do that, because you know what's going to happen. And so I went back. It happened to be a Lloyd's pan, and John Crow, who was the owner and president of Lloyd Pans at the time, John was a speaker in that particular seminar. So John came in later that week, and before John left, I sat down and told him what I had found and showed him what I had done, and I made a pizza for him. And he was equally as impressed as I was, and he ended up taking my pan back. And in a few weeks, John sent me some pans to look at, and the hearth bake disc was created. And that's a special disc. It's a flat disc, and it's got large holes in it. And the idea was that you put randomly spaced holes in the bottom. Every other pan had holes that were in a pattern, but the idea is to have them more random, so the holes don't line up. And so when the holes don't line up, your eye doesn't see a pattern. And so they wouldn't be confused with other pans. What we did is we made the holes in a unique shape, kind of like a cloud. And we just jokingly refer to it as cloud pattern holes. And when we started experimenting with it, one of the things we found was that with the different sizes of pizzas, you could create what's called a pizza bone. Now, a pizza bone is created when you super dry out a crust, and it gets so crispy that it's gone from crispy to flinty. Flinty is when you bite into it and you have to put it in your molars and grind it. And it's not a very pleasant eating experience. And so what we went back to John, and I told him what was happening. And he said, well, how do you propose to address that? And I said, what we need to do is, I said, that rim around the edge of the pan without holes, I found it was variable with the size of the pizza. So if you've got a 10-inch pizza, it actually takes a narrower rim without holes versus, say, a 16 or an 18, which is going to have quite a bit of a wider one. And so we did a little bit of experimenting with that, and we found a combination that worked well. And the hearth bake disc was born. It was made, it was put in inventory, and it's available today. And so, can you produce those same characteristics in an air impingement oven? Absolutely. You just have to know how to do it. But you're not going to do it on a screen or on a power pan or just on a standard disc that you pick up any place. It does take a special disc, so it needs a special baking platform. Your dough formula cannot contain any sugar, milk, or eggs. And so if it does, it's just going to turn too brown at those high temperatures. And then you have to really crank up your oven temperature. You can probably be safe to say that with an air impingement oven, you're going to be maxing out your temperature. And your baking time is going to be in the neighborhood of around 6 minutes. And depending upon how your finger configuration is, you may or may not have to change the finger configuration.
Very interesting. Very interesting, Tom. Do they sell those kind of pans at like Metalcraft and Lloyd's currently?
Lloyd's, only Lloyd's.
Okay.
Yeah. Lloyd, that's lloydpans.com.
Okay.
And one other thing, while we're talking, about air impingement ovens,
yeah,
that I'd like to share with the audience, and there's so many of them out there of all generations. You're speaking about Middleby. Their workhorse is the old PS360 or the old PS360WB. That stands for wide body. And I mean, that is a fantastic oven. They're noisy, they're hot, but they're good. You might say that's almost the gold standard just for an air impingement oven.
Which one is it? What's the name of that again?
Be careful when you buy. That's their PS360. That's Pacesetter 360.
Okay.
That's their old standby. In my opinion, it's probably one of the best of the air impingement ovens.
Okay.
It was widely used. Everybody had them, and it's just a workhorse. It's hard to find a chain that didn't have them at one time or another. Now they've all progressed beyond them.
That's the thing, Tom. When you buy when you buy a deck oven, like a Y600, a Falls 6-shelf rotating oven, when you buy a Blodgett, any of these types of Middleby Marshall, just deck ovens, all you have is two parts to fix. You have the thermostat and you have the thermocouple. That's it. Or no, thermocouple and there's something else. I forgot what it is. Something else that goes. A couple of small things, $100, you're done. These new ones, these conveyor belts, you need a mechanical degree just to go in there.
Yeah, and the new ovens, like I say, the new ovens are good. They're quieter. They're more efficient. They don't spill out as much heat into the room. They actually provide a faster bake. Do you really want a faster bake? If you talk to the chains, the earth is going to stop spinning on its axis if they have to bake a pizza for 20 seconds longer. But for everybody else, no. And my life does not revolve around 20 seconds. I can hold my breath for 20 seconds. Good grief. Why not bake a pizza for 20 seconds longer and make a great one?
No, but Tom, the reason why,
the point I want to make.
But real quick, I just want to say something. The reason why these guys, these huge guys, they don't want you to change the time is because they've built their entire menu based on that time. That's the only reason. And like when you go to
absolutely.
Yeah, so like, hey, if they have cinnamon sticks, if they have mozzarella sticks, if they have wings, they all cook the same exact amount of time, so they cannot change the time.
Yep. Right, absolutely. But that's what I'm saying. You can't change the time. These are issues that they have, but everybody else doesn't have those issues. Shouldn't have those issues. But here's the point I want to make about these air impingement ovens. They're readily available on the used oven market. Some are rebuilt, reconditioned, some are not. That's besides the point. Here's the thing you need to watch for, though.
Yeah.
I had a case a few years ago, more than a few years ago. Young fellow bought a Lincoln oven, and he and I were corresponding back and forth, and he swore up and down that you could not bake a pizza in an air impingement oven. And so he came to me, and I started working with him, and we were communicating back and forth for 3-4 weeks. And he was doing his due diligence by baking pizzas. And we could not get a pizza to come out of that oven. And it was like, if I did not know air impingement ovens as well as I do, I would tend to agree with him that you cannot. And I came to the conclusion that you cannot bake a pizza in that air impingement oven. I said, there's something wrong with it. And the only thing I can think of that's wrong with it is that it's got the wrong finger profile. And he said, well, he kept telling me that he bought it new. It's a new oven. I said, well, wait a minute. I said, the manufacturer should be standing behind that oven. And then it comes out that he bought it from a used restaurant equipment place. And I said, oh, so it's not a new oven. It's new to you, but it's a used oven. And he said, yeah. I said, well, I've been asking you, and you kept telling me that you bought it new. I said, okay. I said, here's what I want from you right now. I want you to go back with a pen and paper. And I said, I want you to write down the serial number on it. And so he wrote down the serial number, and he brought it back to me. I wrote it down, and I had a friend over at Lincoln, and I called her, and I said, would you do me a favor? Her name was Heidi Connors. And I asked Heidi, I said, Heidi, would you please run the serial number on one of your Lincoln ovens? And can you tell me what finger configuration it had when it went out of the factory? Because my experience has been that in many cases, the fingers are not changed that often. She comes back to me and she says, that oven was sold to, get this, not a pizza place. It was sold to Red Lobster, and it had a proprietary finger configuration. Now, what do we know about seafood versus pizza? He could have probably done lobster tails and fish quite nicely in it, but not pizza. And because fish is baked much more gently than pizza is. And I explained to him that you got the entirely wrong finger profile. So I hooked him up with Heidi, and Heidi got him the correct finger profile, trying to salvage what he had and then replacing it. But he had to end up replacing almost all of the fingers in the oven. It cost him $800 more. And when he talked to me later, he said, well, it's really making great pizzas now. But he said, for that $800 difference plus shipping that I had to pay on those fingers, he said, I could have bought a new oven. I said, right. So buyer beware. Know what you're buying when you're buying an air impingement oven. It may look like a pizza oven on the outside, but it might have been profiled with the fingers to bake. It could be. I've seen them used for pastries. I've personally used them for making dog food. There was a product out a number of years ago. It was called pepper nuts. And there's a German cookie called Pfeffernuss, which is pepper nuts. They were making these. They used to give them out in the airplanes for a snack, and they were made out in western Kansas here. And they were using air impingement ovens. And so, again, a special profile on those fingers. And so it can be profiled for anything you want to bake in it. And that's not just for Lincoln ovens, that's for any air impingement oven. So don't be fooled by what it looks like on the outside. It's what's on the inside that determines what it was designed to bake. And the best advice I can give anybody when it comes to buying a used air impingement oven is to study up, read about air impingement ovens, understand the finger configurations, pull out the fingers, look at them. If you don't know what you've got, at least write down the numbers. These fingers are all numbered. They've all got a special number on them. Write it down. Contact the manufacturer with the serial number. Try to find out a little bit of the history of that oven. And that'll at least help you identify whether or not this oven started out life with the intention of baking pizza or something else.
Sure.
These fingers are not exactly cheap to replace. And so
would
keep that in mind.
When you're cooking pizza, have you ever used Pizza Crisp, or do you to put on the bottom of the box? Hold on, Pizza Crisp put on the bottom of the box for flour or oil-based dough that you cook in a pan, even if it's thin crust. What are your opinions on those types of products, and which one do you prefer, and which one do you feel is the most easiest to use?
Pizza Crisp, I can take it or leave it. I've never really found a specific need or use for it. The only time I've ever used Pizza Crisp, I will say to advantage, we used it in a large wholesale manufacturing facility out in New York one time. And what we were actually making a like a pan style pizza, but without a pan, and a very unique type of pizza. It was a very soft dough, very extensible dough, and we had Rheon automated equipment, and no matter what you put down on the conveyor, that silly dough would end up sticking to it. And So it just became a nightmare to work with. And I got to thinking, I said, we need something that's got greater ability to absorb moisture and to hold that dough up off of the conveyors so it doesn't stick. And we had tried cornmeal. Flour was a total disaster. Even semolina flour, which is coarser than regular flour, it was a disaster. Coarse cornmeal would work. That was the good part of it. The bad part of coarse cornmeal was that when it bakes, it's gritty. So it's like having sand in your dough. Not a very pleasant experience. That didn't work. And so I got to thinking. I said, there's a product out there called Pizza Crisp, and I said, let's give that a try. Once I said, it's essentially Japanese breadcrumbs, and so I said, but it's got a much greater dimension, and it can hold more water than any of this stuff. And we tried that, and it worked well. Ends up that they ended up buying it, and I don't know, it looked like about a 50-gallon fiber drums is how they got it in, and so they were using a lot of it. And that was their secret to success for making that product. For mom and pops, very seldom do I ever use it. I will say this, that when it comes time to putting a pizza in a box, I see some people just taking a pizza and dropping it right on top of the cardboard box. I don't like to see that. And the reason why is because you bring the pizza out of the oven, set it off on the side for a few seconds, let it steam off a little bit. And once it's been steaming off, then you go ahead and cut it. But when you put it in the box, at least put a ripple sheet, ripple board, whatever you want to call it. Put a cross saver. Put one of those plastic pizza mats in it, mesh mats in it. But put something to hold it up off of the cardboard. It does two things. One, it prevents the crust itself from picking up the flavor of the cardboard. And that we don't want. Have you ever heard anybody say, well, their pizzas are good, but the crust tastes like cardboard every time we have it delivered? Well, of course, look at what they're setting it on, right on the cardboard. And so the other thing is that when you're setting it on a ripple sheet or a pizza saver or one of the mesh mats, you're actually holding it up off the cardboard. So there's an air gap there. And air is a good insulator. So again, it helps to keep the product or the pizza warm. And also it allows any steam to escape from the bottom. So you tend to get a crispier product.
I've experimented with the pizza nets, with Pizza Crisp, with the ripple cardboard, just a regular cardboard circle, no cardboard. I've worked with. We put a mesh shelf. So when the pizza comes out, you put it on the shelf for just 30 seconds or so, and then you put it back onto the pizza box.
Yep.
The problem is it all works really nicely when you're in R&D, but when it actually comes down to 50 tickets an hour, you really don't have time to mess around.
When ripple sheets, you just throw them in the box. Yeah. I mean, they're pre-fitted to the box. Get them for your box sizes. And now we do. I've got a very close connection with a local pizzeria here, AJ's New York Pizzeria, Manhattan, Kansas. You can Google them; they pop up. And we use crust savers. And the reason why we like to use crust savers, again, doesn't take any extra time to throw them in. But some people call them Mickey Mouse ears. They've got 4 tabs on the corners. And the nice thing about that is the fact that when people get the pizza home, they can actually lift it out of the box right on that crust saver. And that's kind of cool. And it's got an embossed pattern on the bottom of it. So it serves the same purpose. It holds it up. And now I live out in the country. And so for me, one-way drive over to AJ's is depending upon traffic lights, how many lights I hit, but it takes me between 20 and 25 minutes to make the run. And I'll stop up there a lot of times if I'm in town and call home and let my wife know I'm going to pick up a pizza and bring it home. And so I'll pick up a pizza at AJ's and bring it home 20 to 25 minutes later, and it's still reasonably crispy up when I get it home. And it's not a wet, soggy mass. It's a lot. We just ordered out a pizza from, I won't mention the name, from one of the major box chains. I was over in Kansas City. The store that the pizza was ordered from was maybe, I'm going to guess, maybe 4 miles from his house. And when we got it, I mean, it was just a soggy mess. And it only had 2 toppings, sausage and green pepper. That's it. So it wasn't overloaded with vegetable toppings. And in fact, the amount of green pepper on it, one medium-sized green pepper could have probably lasted them for the day. I don't know what my son paid for those green peppers, but if he paid extra for them, they had a special, like 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for like $24.
Hey, do you know? Do you ever heard of Angelino's Pizza?
But anyhow, Angelino's?
Angelino's. It's in Kansas City.
John?
You heard of it?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You have? I'm asking you.
Yeah, I've not had their product.
Yeah.
I've heard about it, but I've not had it.
Yeah, I just had him on my podcast a couple of weeks back, a month ago, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, when one of my favorite places over in the Kansas City area is Pizza Shop. They make kind of a they use a cutter pan, deck ovens, and it's kind of reminiscent of a Chicago thin crust. The sausage isn't the same. The sausage is unique for Chicago, but it's what we refer to as a thin crispy, and it's true to its name. It is a pretty crispy product. But my son lives in Olathe, and they've got one just about a mile down the street from them. But there's others up, get closer into the city, and I think there's about 7 or 8 of the pizza shops in the Kansas City area. But the whole thing is that you've got to put something in the box rather than just setting it right on the cardboard.
Yeah.
Regardless, I mean, if there's oil on the bottom, some people use oil in a pan. For example, with deep dish pizzas, you've got 2 choices when you're doing deep dish. You can either put oil or what we call a plastic shortening or plastic fat. By plastic, we mean that it's malleable. It's not pourable. Think of Crisco, for example.
Yeah.
Or butter flavored Crisco is one of my favorites in a deep dish pan. And you can use that in the pan. If you use oil, the oil will be on the surface of the crust, and your fingers will actually feel oily. And that's kind of unique. So the perception, I had a professor one time who told me that perception is nothing but a reality, and reality is nothing more than a perception. And how true that is when you think about that for a moment. So if it's oily or not, if it's perceived as being oily, ladies and gentlemen, it is oily. And so if you use oil in the pan, your crust is going to feel oily. When you drop it into a box, just a plain brown pizza box without a glassine coating on it, or without a coated cardboard circle, a wax coated circle, that oil is absorbed into the box, and now you see the oil stain in the bottom of the box, and people look at that and they say, "Ooh, how gross! Ooh, it's really ugly." And we're eating that much fat and oil. Well, yeah. But if you were to use a plastic fat, i.e., Crisco or butter flavored Crisco, you could use margarine. You could even use butter if you wanted to. If you use that, what happens is that it crystallizes quite rapidly after baking again as the pizza begins to cool off a little bit, and it does not transfer and it does not feel oily. That's kind of unique. That's the good news. The bad news is that it does not impart a fried characteristic. So you do not get quite as crispy of a finished product using a plastic fat as you do from using, say, something like peanut oil or something in the pan. So again, managing those characteristics just by the type of oil that you're using in the pan. And when it goes to fitting the dough into the pan, if you put oil in the pan, you have to open the dough ball up to a little bit larger than the pan, drop it into the pan. And if you don't, if you just try dropping a dough ball into an oiled pan, it's like trying to push a chain uphill. You really don't make much progress. The dough just keeps sliding around, and it's kind of an exercise in futility. But if you were to use a plastic fat in the pan and drop a dough ball into that pan, the dough ball or the dough itself adheres to that plastic fat on the bottom and around the sides, and it's really easy to open it up and to fit it in because it sticks, it stays. You don't have to come back to it 20 minutes later, check it and touch it up to make sure that it still fits the pan. And you can also do a hybrid, which I've done many a time, and that is where we use a plastic fat around the edges, but we use oil in the bottom. And because the biggest problem that we have are the edge of the dough pulling off the edge of the pan as it wants to shrink back. And so that holds it long enough for the dough to relax. So it's really easy to manage your dough. You don't have to come back to it and keep checking to make sure that the dough hasn't shrunk back from the pan.
Okay.
A lot of little tricks of the trade.
I love it. I know exactly what you're talking about too, which is great. And anybody in the pizza industry knows what you're talking about. Now, pre-cook your green peppers, mushrooms, onions, or not to pre-cook your mushrooms, onions, and peppers before you put them on the pizza. What's your opinion on that?
I prefer not to. I prefer not to pre-cook them. When we say pre-cook, I like to use the word saute.
Yeah. Get a little salt, a little pepper, just par bacon, par saute them a little bit.
Yeah. I really prefer to use the raw to start with, and rather than using a sauteed topping on them. The sauteed, if you're having an issue, I'll give you a good example. I was up in Grand Island, Nebraska one time, working with a young fellow up there with deck ovens. And he had two triple stacks next to each other. And his whole claim to fame was that we put more toppings on our pizzas than anybody else. And that was his shtick, if you will. And that's fine. However, his biggest complaint was that when people get these things, could you throw a couple extra straws in the box? And they needed the straws in order to eat the pizzas. They were that wet and soggy. Well, of course, because they're loaded with vegetable toppings, and he's using a deck oven with absolutely no forced air in it at all, no convection. So what do we expect to get? And the answer is a wet, soggy pizza. And so I showed him how if we sauteed the toppings, that would help a lot. And that was good. However, he was not set up for it. He was not in a position to use sauteed toppings. Um, we tried one other thing, which worked very well, but it ended up being too expensive for him. And that was, they're called moisture controlled IQF vegetables. Have you ever bought a DiGiorno pizza? Yeah. They sell them up there in Chicago. And it used to be owned by Kraft. Now it's owned by Nestle. And it's in the frozen pizza counters, display cases. And if you ever look at DiGiorno, one of the things that you'll see is that the green peppers are vivid green. Vivid. Everything is vivid. Everything is bright in color. The cheese is bright white, and everything is colorful on top of that pizza, including after baking. And they hold their shape. They don't turn to mush. And the question is, how do they do that? Well, they use moisture-controlled vegetables. And moisture-controlled vegetables are, think of it like this, they've been partially dehydrated, but they've never been heated. And so, so you get all of the freshness of the fresh vegetables, but you don't get all the excess water. And they retain their shape, they retain their flavor, and they retain their color. Excellent. That's their secret. And he tried that, but it was way too expensive for him. So,
but he could have done it himself.
Long story short,
he sell dehydrators.
Well, they're not. They don't use dehydrators.
Oh.
They use a system. It's kind of a It's a modified form of freeze drying. And so what they actually do is they freeze the product and then they pull a vacuum on it, and they pull the moisture, part of the moisture out, collect it on coils, take the product out, condense the coils, or condense the water off the coils, put the product back in again, but all done in a tunnel, in a chamber. And that's your IQF vegetable toppings. Those are, I think it's ConAgra Foods that has those available if anybody's interested in it. They used to come out of California. Valley Evaporating was the name of the company. And I think they sold that to, I think it was ConAgra Foods, that now has moisture-controlled vegetable toppings. Really great. But again, really not in the realm for most pizzerias. So for him, I had a friend that worked for Middleby. He was a chef, Dennis Bracken. And Dennis worked out of Denver, the Denver office. And I don't know if they still do or not, but Middleby used to have a tractor trailer that ran around the country, a self-contained unit with their ovens on it. And I called Dennis and I explained to him about this young fellow. And I said, is there any chance we could get your tractor trailer to stop here at Grand Island? And he said, yeah. In fact, he said, let me look once. He said, the truck just went out. And so he looked and he said, it's on Interstate 80 right now, heading your way. And he said, I think we could arrange for it to stop by there for maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours. Is that enough time? And I said, yeah. So actually, we went out and we marked off a spot in the parking lot for a tractor trailer for him to park. And as soon as he got in there, we went out and took some of our pizzas out to him, and we ran it in the air impingement oven. We didn't use any special profiling or anything. We didn't have time to play with it, but we just ran it through just with a standard pizza profile. It dried off the top of the pizzas so much that he had two triple stack deck ovens up for sale real soon after that, and went with air impingement ovens.
Okay.
But you see, again, the oven has to match your store concept. And which brings me to another point, and that is that when I'm working with somebody, as you know, when you're going to open up a store, somebody says, I want to start a pizzeria. Fine. Your two most expensive pieces of equipment is going to be your mixer and your oven. And so first thing I ask is, what is your store concept going to be? Just, what kind of store is this going to be? Well, I want a wood burning oven. That wasn't my question. What is your concept? Well, we've got two high schools down the street from us, and we're going to do a great lunch trade. And you want wood burning ovens? That doesn't make any sense at all. You want air impingement ovens, or you want deck ovens. But wood burning ovens for high school kids down the street because kids are going to be flocking in for lunch? It doesn't work though. But I heard that you can bake a pizza in 90 seconds in it. Yeah. Did you ever run a wood-fired oven? And the answer is no. And how big is your store? What kind of square footage do you have? And so, again, if your name happens to be Wolfgang Puck and you're asking about an oven and the name of your store is going to be Spago's, I just don't think that an air impingement oven is going to have much of a future in your store. It just doesn't seem like it's going to fit. And if your name is Tony Giminani and you're out in Las Vegas, I just have a hard time seeing air impingement ovens. But if you're opening up a store where you're going to do a lot of Delco out in the country someplace outside of the major metropolitan areas, a lot of these little bedroom communities are popping up. I'm working with a fellow right now in a mall that's located just between two communities, and it's all going to be Delco. And while he had aspirations of a wood-fired oven, he ended up, after he looked at it, he ended up going with air impingement because it just fits the store concept so much better.
Yeah.
The product is a better product, and that's what it's all about.
Absolutely, Tom.
So,
Absolutely.
it goes back to your kitchen. Are you going to have a dark kitchen or an open kitchen? Why an open kitchen if you're going to be Delco? Nobody's hanging around to watch it.
Yeah.
But if you're strictly dine-in, an open kitchen is a great conversation piece.
Yeah.
And that'll bring people in. It's a little extra icing on the cake, you might say.
Tom, have you ever cooked a thin crust pizza in a pizza pan to make it like an oil-based thin crust? And what are your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah. Works great. Works absolutely great. My favorite pan for those, I use a cutter pan. You've got a choice. You can either use a coupe pan. I don't prefer the coupe pans that much, but I do prefer the cutter pans. Those are the pans, by the way. They've got a flat bottom, and they've got a 40-degree angle on the shoulders, and they're actually designed that what you do is you sheet out the dough. They're made for sheeting operations. You either hand roll it or sheet it. You lay it over the top of the pan, and then you use either a pie pin or a rolling pin, and you roll it over the top of the pan, and the dough just falls into the pan. And it works great because you can oil the pan, the dough just drops into it, and you end up with a nice fried characteristic on that bottom crust. And that's what I was saying before. You end up with a fried crust rather than a baked crust.
We use excuse me. We use what's that called? My goodness. What's the spray you use to keep things from sticking to your pans?
Ham?
Yes. Yes.
Release coating, Pam.
Yeah. Yes. That's what we use, Pam, to keep the.
Yeah, you can.
Go ahead.
To me, that's expensive. To spray, to spray the inside of a pan with that's expensive. You're buying the cans. You got to get rid of the cans. You're buying the propellant. You're using the propellant. That I bet you're probably paying 50 cents, 75 cents just for the can itself, not even the contents. Personally, myself, I would rather buy the oil in a gallon or a 5-gallon container and just use it that way. But again, to each his own. I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing it. I just always look at economics.
You know what? Let me tell
And
you.
when it comes to economics,
Yeah, there's another thing I'm dealing with. Maybe you can help me with it. Right now, what we're doing, this is how our process goes for Papa Ray's Pizza franchise. So we're making the dough. We put it on the table. We cut it to size, and we put it into a pan. Okay, individually into each of the pans. So 10, we make 20 10s, 20 12s, 20 whatever, all the way up to 24-inch, and then once we're done, we let it proof for about 30 minutes, and then we push it down a little bit, and we saran wrap every single one of them.
Okay.
And then we put them in the fridge, and then we use it the following day or the day after. I have not been able to find a better way so that I don't have to saran wrap it, and I don't have to saran wrapping it. It takes the longest time. But I've tried to cover it in other ways with a cover, and it always dries out, I think.
Well, one of the things that I've done quite successfully, I'll go ahead and use a wheel table, and the only modification that we do to it is that we put rails on it that come up about 2 feet high, and we put a layer of pans on, and we put they're called pan covers. All they are is it's a raw aluminum disc, anodized aluminum round disc, and they're pan size specific. So you get them like 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. I think you get them all the way up to 20-inch. And they just fit over the top of the pan. And they overlap the top of the pan by maybe half an inch on each side. So if you're buying a 16-inch, the actual diameter is 17. And we put those over the tops of the pans, and that seals the top of the pan quite well. Then we put another pan on top of that. We just keep stacking them up. Pan separators, that's what they call them. I want to say American Metal Craft is the company that has those. And while we're talking here, I'm just going to take a look. But we use pan separators, and you can stack up pans as high as you dare go on them. And
have you ever used
using those? I've had very good success.
Yeah. All right, I'll give that a shot. Have you ever used? Yeah,
take a look at pan separators.
I will. Have you ever used Garland air deck ovens?
Garland, yeah, ADOs.
Yeah, the Garland air deck oven. I have fallen in love with it because it's a combination of deck / conveyor.
Yeah, I did all of the prototyping work on it.
You did?
Yeah, here round separators from American Metal Craft. So, in fact, they're right there in Franklin Park. They're not too far from you.
Yeah, I bought many things with them. Okay, I will try it out.
Yeah, they're just called round separators. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. all the way up to 20-inch.
Do you prefer? Would you, if I were to give you an option between a Y600 and a Garland air deck, which one would you choose?
Depends upon my application. But in a case like that, I think I would probably go with the ADO because of flexibility.
Yeah. All right. With pizza pans, would you go aluminum or would you go cast iron?
I never go with cast iron for pizza pans.
Or not black. Black. I didn't mean to say cast iron. You know, they have black pans. They have aluminum pans.
Yeah. Well, aluminum is just the substrate from which the pan is made, but you can buy aluminum pans three ways. You can buy it as just raw spun aluminum, which is the least preferable. I see very little use for that. Normally, the only time those are ever used is they're used in bakeries for cake pans once in a while. And then the next one is going to be anodized, and they sell those as bright anodized, and that's just a silver anodized finish. And again, that has very, very, very limited application for pizza. And then the third one, it would be what they call a black finish, and a lot of people refer to them as a non-stick finish, because most of the black ones are somewhat nonstick. Lloyd Pans has an extremely durable one. I used to use a quarter and stand there and take one of their pans and rub the quarter on the pan. And while I'm talking about destroying your pans, and I'd say, "Oh my gosh, look, I've destroyed my pan. That's a $25 pan. I got to throw it away." And then I take a paper towel and wipe off the mar. And I say, now I don't. And I'd pass the pan around, and I'd pass the quarter around too. What I actually did is wore the quarter down. I wore the serrations off the edge of the quarter.
Wow.
And that's how tough that finish is. Nobody uses Teflon anymore. Teflon just is not durable. But whatever you get for a black finish on a pan, today I have found it to be quite durable, and they have to be. I mean, if your finish is going to start coming off, how do you remain competitive with your competition? And the answer is you don't. So everybody rises to the same height in the water, and that's good for us. But let me talk a little bit about the pans here for a moment. With the aluminum pans, you definitely want black finish because black absorbs heat, silver reflects it. Now, there are some cases where we do want silver, and I can think of a couple cases. One case in particular where we were doing pan pizzas, and the pan pizzas were heavily loaded, and we really had to slow the oven down. And we had a single deck. But we also wanted to do some thin crust pizzas. And the problem was that we were getting, a thick crust pizza and a thin crust pizza bake the same from the top. That's a unique thing about air impingement. It sees toppings and cheese. That's all it sees. So they get baked the same. The reason why a thick crust pizza has to be baked longer is not because of the toppings, but because of what's under the toppings, the dough. So the bottom is what determines when a pizza is done. So we had to slow the ovens down because they were doing a thick crust pizza that was, good grief. I used to have a picture of it. It was thicker than a quarter. That was the finished thickness of it. So it was pretty thick. And yet they wanted to do a thin crust, and it just burnt the snot out of a thin crust pizza because our baking times are so long in that air impingement oven. And so what to do? And I said, I got an idea. So I just took a piece of foil and I wrapped it around a disc and on the bottom so it reflected heat away from it. It wasn't the best because, yeah, you get an air insulating layer and everything else. But it proved my point, and that was that we didn't burn the bottom and the top was done. So the next thing we did is we ordered in some just plain bright silver anodized discs with no color on them. And we ran our thin crust on those. And guess what? They baked very, very well. So we were able to do thin crust and thick crust side by side in the same oven, even though we had a 14-minute bake time. And so, again, I used that characteristic of reflecting heat to allow us to make a thin crust, even though we had a longer baking time. And yeah, we had to load up a little bit extra sauce on the top just to keep that thin crust from burning or from drying out too much. But that was a small price to pay in order for them to produce a thin crust, which they're getting orders for and couldn't do it.
Gotcha. Next question for you. Do you prefer your ingredients on top?
And there's other, and I'll also mention too that, I'm sorry?
Do you prefer products on top of the cheese or under the cheese?
I normally like to put them on top of the cheese. Again, depending upon the circumstance, but it's the cheese that's going to burn. If I'm using a diced, if I'm bringing in my vegetables pre-cut, some people are, and they're coming in diced. God, I hate diced. I'd rather have sliced than diced. But the problem with diced, as you know, they're so prone to charring or scorching on the edges. In a case like that, you're probably going to be better off putting them underneath the cheese. If you got a lot of vegetable toppings, you probably don't want to put them underneath the cheese. You want to get them up on top so you get rid of the moisture. Again, depending upon your cheese, some types of cheese will tend to burn faster than others. Some types of cheese just remain bright white. Again, going back, remember that DiGiorno I talked to you about?
Yeah.
They spec out their cheese for use on that DiGiorno pizza. And when you bake a DiGiorno pizza, the cheese remains white. I mean, white. It's like, it melts. It's creamy. Ain't no color to it. It's just white. Well, that's for a reason. And the reason is we're paying good money for those moisture-controlled vegetables. So I don't know if have you ever done any oil painting or know anybody who does oil painting?
No.
The first thing they do is they color the canvas. They paint the canvas before they put a picture on it. And that's the background. So on a pizza, what makes the background? The cheese. And everything else on top of that stands out. So again, it's a visual. Perception is reality. You perceive those vegetables as being brighter, whiter. The cheese is whiter, so the vegetables are more stark in color. It looks better.
Yeah. So you answered my previous question. You answered the question I was going to ask you next, which was, do you prefer diced vegetables versus sliced vegetables? Do you prefer them thick or do you prefer them thin? And do you prefer mushrooms out of a can or mushrooms that are fresh?
Okay, now that's a good question. Again, sliced. My preference, personal preference, I like to have a little bit of texture in the vegetables, so I prefer the thicker sliced. Again, you have to decide what your customers have a preference for. But my own personal preference, I think it comes across having a fresher presentation if there's a little bit of body left in them yet. Now, when it comes to mushrooms, for me, it's thumbs up on canned mushrooms.
Really?
I just have so many. Yeah. They hold up so much better on top of a pie. If I'm going in totally raw into a pizzeria, I always tell people, look, buy canned mushrooms to start with, the sliced mushrooms, and we'll see if we can make fresh mushrooms work for you. They don't always work. If you've got a longer baking time, they're not going to work. And sometimes they will discolor, they'll turn dark. They just don't look good. They don't hold their moisture. The presentation isn't good. Flavor is okay, but the presentation isn't. So the canned actually is my go-to, but I'm not averse to going to fresh if the conditions will permit it.
Interesting. Very interesting. Pizza sauce and next two topics: pizza sauce and cheese. Pizza sauce.
Oh, yeah.
There are some people out there who say, if you're not making your own pizza sauce and cooking it, you're not doing it right. You're just taking it out of a can. You know what I mean? So some people, there's a lot of good pizza sauces out of a can, and there's a lot of people who take a pizza cans and then they make their own. They just add basil, they add salt, pepper, garlic, oregano, and they customize a can to their own flavor. So some people use 7-Eleven Full Red, some people use San Marzano. What are you thinking? What's your favorite, and what do you recommend? And what do you see as the best sauce around?
We did a huge amount of research on that. The only thing that we probably spent more time researching in pizza was bubbles than sauce. And so sauce is a very, very important aspect of the pizza. Now, first question, cooked versus non-cooked. But you know how good a sauce smells when it's being cooked being simmered in the kitchen, right? Yeah. Oh, just so wonderful. How can you say that? That's not wonderful. It's just so aromatic. Guess what? Aromatics are volatiles. Those are things, that's goodness that you've cooked away. You stripped that away from your sauce. Nobody's ever going to smell that again.
Yeah, but
you've just taken that away from your customer. So my preference is don't cook your sauce. It's going to get cooked on top of the pie. Let your customer enjoy that aroma, just like you did, because nobody else is ever going to be able to smell that again. So let your customer get it. They're the ones who are paying for it. Let them appreciate it.
What's your favorite sauce on the market?
Cooked versus non-cooked. Favorite sauce on the market? I've got two. One is the ground tomatoes from Stanislaus with peel. And I emphasize that, with peel. And the reason why is that, yes, right underneath the peel, you can do this yourself. Take a fresh, very ripe tomato, scald it, and then peel it. And right underneath the peel, you will find a thin layer of, it's called velvet. That's the correct name for it. That's what it's referred to as, velvet. And the velvet is what distinguishes a fresh tomato from a non-fresh tomato. That's what makes that garden picked warm tomato right out of the field. It's been sitting in the sun all day, and you bite into it and you get that wonderful flavor. That's from the velvet. If you peel it, you lose that, and it doesn't taste like tomato anymore. You don't get that fresh, ripe tomato flavor. So it has to be with the peel. To me, it doesn't get any finer. I've used that right out of the can. Then the next thing is to signature. Okay, to signature, that means that you open up a can and, gee, anybody can do this. So I want a signature. I want to make it my own. I want to put my signature on that sauce. That's great. How to signature a sauce? Well, do not repeat again. Do not. You put fresh garlic, fresh onion powder, or garlic powder. or salt, garlic salt, onion salt. Do not put that into your tomato sauce. Period. End of discussion.
Even regular salt?
Why? Why are you so adamant about that? No, you can put regular salt in, but don't put onion salt or garlic salt in. Don't put any onion or garlic product into your sauce. And somebody out there right now saying this guy has got rocks for brains because it adds so much flavor. It certainly does. I cannot disagree with you. Do not put it in. Test this for yourself. Just take a cup and put your tomato product into it, whatever you're using. And then just go ahead and take some fresh garlic, if that's what you want to use, or whatever garlic product you want to use. Put it into it. Stir it in well. Put it in the refrigerator and come back to it tomorrow. You've got tomato jelly. Tomatoes are very, very high in pectin, and onion and garlic contain an enzyme which acts as a catalyst for those pectins to gel, and you will make tomato jelly. And then in order to use that, you're going to add water to it. And when you add water to it, you're diluting it. And when you're diluting it, you're diluting your flavor because water doesn't have a whole lot of flavor of its own. So that's why I don't use it. Now, if you want to use onion or garlic or whatever like that, that's fine. But what I like to do is I use it in my assembly. For example, I open up a skin, and the first thing I'll do then is I'll take my garlic. A lot of times I use diced garlic. It's one of my favorites. It's just easy to use, and it's got a little bit of oil in it. The oil becomes imparted with the garlic flavor, and I'll just simply take some of that and I'll spread that randomly over that skin. And then I'll go ahead and I'll take the sauce. Let's say I'll open up a can of ground tomatoes with peel and put that right in the middle, and then I'll spread that evenly over the top. And now I'm ready to start building my pizza. That's how I add the garlic. If you want to use garlic powder, you can simply sprinkle it right on, put your sauce on, and then sprinkle it on over the top of that. That's the way to do it. If you want to add it during the day, for example, I'm bringing it up onto the bench, onto my make table, and I've got a container here. It holds, let's say, 3 gallons of sauce. To that 3 gallons of sauce, I'm going to add 2 ounces of garlic or 2 ounces of onion powder or something, whatever. Wouldn't be that much. But I'm going to add that much to it, and I'm going to stir that in. All right, that's fine. That's not a problem. But don't use that tomorrow because it will thicken. It'll gel up overnight. So that's the reason why I do that.
Gotcha.
The other thing is that when we get into cheese, I hear a lot of chitter chatter. They're doing something with the cheese nowadays that they did do before, because the mozzarella it doesn't have the flavor that it used to have. I remember it having a lot more flavor. And right. So what's happening? Well, the cheese isn't any different. Mozzarella, by the way, you can look this up. Mozzarella has a very neutral flavor, by the way. It does not have a dominant flavor. Mozzarella should be used. Remember what I said before about painting the canvas?
Yeah.
It's a background. It's mozzarella cheese is not a good selection if you're trying to get a really cheesy flavored pizza. Mozzarella is not the go-to cheese for that. So one of the things that we found was, why is it? People are seeing something. So we started looking at that. And one of the things that we found, and this is multi-dimensional, because it really it opened we saw a whole bunch of doors that we had to open to it fully. Here's what happened. What was happening that people were saying you just can't taste the cheese anymore? Well, what we found was that people are using more and more and more dried oregano, especially oregano and sometimes basil, but in a dried form. And in dried form, both are very, very pungent. And what happens, one, these can both, they kind of lose their flavor with storage time. And so if they're not pretty fresh, you can have dried basil that looks like dried basil, but really doesn't smell like dried basil. And the oregano is the same way. And then all of a sudden you get some fresh stuff that comes in and you're using the same amount of it. And whoa, just blows your socks off because there's so much of it. We don't control how much we use. We just kind of use the shaker can and shake it on. But what we found was that when we stopped using the basil and the dried oregano, dried basil, dried oregano, we just took both of them off. People could taste the cheese. And we actually had people commenting at the pizza shows, gee, what kind of cheese is that? That's really a good cheese. And they never did that before. So
you're talking about
now,
people who
you're
talking about the pizzerias who, when the pizza comes out of the oven, they are shaking the oregano and basil on the top before they cut it. Correct?
Either that or putting it on before baking. Yeah.
Well, what if you add dried basil? What if you add dried oregano to your pizza sauce? Is it the same thing?
You get the same thing because it just totally permeates the entire pizza. Even goes up into the cheese. And oil, fat, anything that contains fat is going to trap those flavors in great magnitude. And that's why, I'm not a smoker, never have been. But if you're ever at a party where people have been smoking, and for example, a wedding, a friend of mine was married one time, and we had a piece of the wedding cake and we brought it home, and we stuck it, we wrapped it up, and we stuck it in the refrigerator. And a few days later, we went to eat a piece of the cake, and when I tasted the cake, it was like, I know that flavor. Yes, the icing, wonderful flavor. Is it Winston? No, I think maybe that's Camel's. It tasted like cigarette smoke.
Sure.
And the reason why, it was buttercream icing. And remember the old adage, if any of our viewers out there are old enough to remember Mama telling us to keep the butter dish always covered in the refrigerator. There was good reason for it, because butter is 80% fat, and it picks up any flavors that happen to be loose in the refrigerator. If you've got onions in the refrigerator, you'll have onion flavored butter soon. If garlic gets open or something, you'll have garlic flavored butter. Whatever aromas are in the refrigerator, that's what your butter is going to taste like. But what we ended up doing was we switched gears a little bit, and we started looking at using fresh basil, the green leaf stuff. And there's a product out there, it's called Microleaf. And they sell a microleaf basil and microleaf oregano. It's a very small leaf. And we started experimenting with that a bit, and that worked quite well. The other thing that we did there was to the other thing that we ended up doing was
damn phone.
I got a silly phone here, it won't quit ringing. Damn phones. What we did though was we took the basil, fresh green basil leaves, which are expensive if you go to the supermarket to buy them, but
they're expensive and very delicate.
For a couple bucks from you.
Very delicate.
Yeah, but you can buy a shoebox. You can buy a shoebox full for a couple bucks from your distributor, and we just simply took those, we stacked them up, we rolled them, and we French cut them, so they're cut up into strips. They make them just super easy to apply that way. Just throw a couple pinches on your pizza, and you get all the flavor. But you get a bouquet. You don't get the pungency, and that made a huge difference in the flavor. And so we started doing that. And to this day, let's see, we did that work. I've been retired for 7 years, and we did that work at least 5 years. So at least 12, 13 years now that I have not used dried basil or oregano, just the fresh green leaf. And one of the doors that we found at the same time was that, would you agree that we've got an aging population?
Yes.
Just, look around you. We've got an aging population. There's more of us old ARPers, as I like to refer to us as ARPers, AARPERS, and running around than ever before in history. We're living longer. Somebody once said that life didn't begin until you got to be 50. They were wrong. Life doesn't even begin until you're 70, and then you start having fun. And so we're living longer. But look around in your pizzeria. Look at the average age of the people walking in. Are you really pulling in the 70s, people in their 60s, 70s, 75, 80-year-old range? Or are they all younger people? Who's got the money? Mom and dad or grandma and grandpa? Ask yourself that question. And for the most part, it's grandma and grandpa, not mom and dad. And so if you're not bringing in us ARPers, you're missing out on a pretty good customer. And when you ask people, why don't you eat pizza like you used to? And they'll say, well, I actually love pizza, but it just doesn't love me as much anymore. And well, what do you mean by that? Well, it just gives me heartburn. I don't know what it is, but I just get heartburn so bad. Okay. Well, as we get older, we probably don't eat as many hot peppers anymore as we used to when we were a kid. And so when it comes to that dried basil and dried oregano, they're pungent. And when you eat that, it kind of sits in your stomach and it's like, heartburn. That's what it's called. So when you take that out and you replace it with the fresh counterpart, you don't have that problem at all. And one of the things that you might try doing sometime is making a pizza. And you don't have to just stop using the dried basil. You've got customers that expect it, that like it, and that's fine. But what you might do is maybe just do something a little different. Don't call it a Geritol pizza. They're liable to slam you for that. But why don't you just call it an old world pizza, made in old world tradition? How would you like to have that? Would you like to have that regular or old world? And well, what's the difference? Well, if it's made in old world tradition, what we do is we use fresh basil and or oregano, your choice, and maybe do something else a little different to it. That, and just see if that doesn't help. Send out some certificates, 50% off on a card to people that you know that would be in that age group, and that could collect on that. But try to get people coming back in that are in that 50 plus age group to try that old world presentation. See how that works. You all familiar with the margarita and the little bit of the history behind it? It was to celebrate Queen Margarita, and it was made in the colors of the flag and of the Italian flag, which if you're using dried basil or oregano, I have to assume are red, white, and kind of a muddy something or another. That would be the colors of the flag, right?
Yes.
I don't think so. I think it's red, white, and green, isn't it?
Yeah. No.
So where'd the green come from?
I have a question from you. I have a question about this.
Fresh basil.
Yes. So some restaurants here, when you order a margarita, they put the dough, the pizza sauce, fresh mozzarella, fresh basil, and tomatoes. But tomatoes is not supposed to be on there.
Uh-huh.
I don't think tomatoes are supposed to be on there. It depends on who you ask.
Yeah. It's 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 open for interpretation. That's the best way to put it.
Okay.
But which you asked me. I told you I had two favorite products to use for my sauce. My other favorite product that I use for the sauce comes in two forms. One, it's not a sauce at all. Instead, what I use dead ripe tomatoes, which I thin slice, and then I layer in bar towels to pick up the excess moisture off of them. And I use that rather than sauce. You want flavor? Try that sometime. And the only thing you do is you open up the skin, and then you brush it with a little bit of olive oil, real thin. If you can see a shine on the surface, you've got plenty. And then it takes about one tennis ball sized fresh tomato to do a 12-inch pizza. So you're not looking for 100% coverage. And just thin slice that and lay that over the top. That's it. Then start building up your cheese. Now, vine ripened tomatoes are not available at all times. In the summertime, it's great because you can go to the local farmer's market. You can contract with a tomato grower to provide your tomatoes to you. Life is good. This time of the year, it's kind of hard to do that. So I switch gears at this time of the year, and I go back to Stanislaus, and I use the 7440 tomato fillet. And I drain those. I take the juice off of that, and I'll use that if I'm doing pasta or something on the side. And I use that from part of my pasta sauce. But I take those drained tomato fillets and I lay those on in place of the tomato slices. And I just scatter them over the top, not looking for 100% coverage. And then for an old world presentation, it doesn't have to get too carried away. I like to use the grande fleur de latte. It comes in I think it's a 1 ounce cheese ball and also a 4 ounce cheese ball. I like the 4 ounce. And it's about the size of a tennis ball. And I don't cut it. I peel it. I peel it like an orange. Well, what that does is it gives me multi-dimensional, different size, different shaped pieces. So again, it has that handcrafted appearance. The cheese kind of melts in where it's thin, where you've torn it, you've peeled it off. Where it's thicker, it remains more as a solid cheese. Different shapes, different sizes. Again, visually, it's more striking. Sure looks a lot better than diced or shredded, which is way too uniform going on the top. And so that's how I like to prepare it. And you've got portion control. Again, 4 ounces is all you need on top of a 12-inch pizza. You don't need more than that. Now, I said before that mozzarella is pretty neutral in flavor, and it is. It's really quite neutral. So what do you do to kind of up the flavor on it? Well, you can blend it. And I love to blend my cheeses to get more depth. I call it depth of flavor. I'm not trying to get a different flavor. I'm just trying to get a more cheesy flavor, more depth of that cheese flavor. And my preference, and everybody's got their own preference, but my preference on a 12-inch pizza, and I just use 12-inch because it's a standard format, I use 4 ounces of mozzarella, and then I add 1 ounce of parm, shredded parm, and then I will add 1 ounce of Romano. And I like to use the powdered Romano rather than the shredded, but you could use shredded if you so wanted to. And to me, that gives a absolutely great flavor profile. It certainly ups the the flavor profile of just a straight mozzarella. And I don't care whose mozzarella you're using. It could be Grande's or anybody's. It's going to up it, and it does a lot for that presentation.
Are you saying that? Would you say that Grande cheese is probably one of the best cheeses out there, or what's your favorite cheese?
I think it is. Again, everybody's got an opinion. I like the Grande. It's
which one?
Maybe I'm partial to it because I've grown up around it. I've used a lot of it, but I've also used I've used a lot of the Leprino product. Nothing wrong with the Leprino, and it's an IQF cheese, so it really works well in some shops because it comes in frozen. You hold it frozen until your time to use it. It takes a couple days to thaw it out, and it's a very, very consistent product. But again, they are big in blending, Leprino company, and they're out of Denver, I believe. Yep, and so you can get custom-made cheese blends from Leprino Cheese Company. But again, whatever you opt to use, just be aware that there's a lot to be said about blending different cheeses into it. Experiment, find something that you like. Again, it doesn't have to be an Italian cheese. It could be almost any type of cheese that has some freestanding flavor.
You know what, Tom? You're right. And let me tell you, this has been an excellent conversation. You have been so informative. You're a walking restaurant pizzeria encyclopedia. And honestly, I could talk to you for days. And I think that the people who listen to this show and myself have gotten tons of knowledge from you, from what you've spoken about. And I'd love to have you on another episode if you wouldn't mind. If you enjoyed the conversation, I'd love to have you on another episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Tom, have a great day.
Yeah, great one. And to the entire audience, I've really enjoyed this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Always Direct podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.